Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
In the 1950s, the American Psychiatric Association was the most important in the world. The biggest, the richest, the most influential. They had the power to call homosexuality a mental illness. In 1952, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual added homosexuality to the list of mental disorders under sexual deviations. Homosexuality was at the top of that list. The church has always seen homosexuality as a sin. In the 1950s, governments decided it was criminal, and psychiatry saw it as an illness. That changed in 1973 when the gay liberation movement had homosexuality removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Today on Rainbow Country, a spotlight on the powerful new documentary, CURED. I'm joined by one of the filmmakers, Bennett Singer, to find out all about this powerful new film. All that and more on episode 275, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Segato.
Hi, I'm Gord Depp of the Spoons. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 11 outlets across Canada. So whether you're listening in the Yukon, British Columbia, the Prairies, the Maritimes, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and on streaming. Thanks to you, together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast, and a top 100 LGBT podcast to follow. So today, award-winning filmmaker Bennett Singer joins me to talk about the powerful new documentary, CURED, a film that tells the tale of what it took to get homosexuality removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in 1973. Plus, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring a 3-song 80s set, a 3-song Pet Shop Boys set, as well as new music from some queer artists. All that ahead, but when I return, he's worked at Time Magazine, and recently, the American Historical Association just named his film Best Documentary of 2021. Award-winning filmmaker Bennett Singer joins me to talk CURED when I return.
Hi, I'm writer Adam Smith, author of Deep Sniff, A History of Poppers and Queer Futures. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
If you were gay in those days, you were diagnosed as suffering from a mental disorder. Like so many people in my generation, I went to psychoanalysis to be cured.
These are some of the methods doctors employ to cure homosexuality: electroshock therapy, hysterectomies on lesbians, castrations of gay men.
People use psychiatry as a reason to discriminate. Apart from the discrimination against us, it gave us a horrible image of ourselves.
In the early 1970s, there was this growing rebellion against psychiatry, and we wanted to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
The body of knowledge which claims sickness for homosexuality has to be challenged.
We could not expect our civil rights as long as we were burdened with the sickness label.
Maybe it makes you feel good to be able to say that we are sick. Does it make you feel good?
The body of medical evidence suggests that it is a mental aberration.
There were so many of us that were at the same point. Enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Period.
A number of psychiatrists talked about, why don't we organize, we can make an impact. John Fryer took a step as being the first psychiatrist to say, I'm a gay person, but no one recognized him. He represented all the people who were hiding and invisible.
The effect was electric.
At psychiatric annual meetings, there were demonstrations, if not in fact riots. Ron Gold's a gay activist. He got up there and he yelled out, "Stop it, you're making me sick."
I told them in my speech, you don't have the right to decide that perfectly happy people are sick.
This fight was the most important moment in gay liberation history.
Bennett Singer, hi, how are you?
I am doing well. Thrilled to be here.
Well, I have to say, thank you so much for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about your most recent documentary, a powerful documentary called CURED, recently kicked off the most recent season of Independent Lens on PBS. First of all, congrats on kicking off the new season of Independent Lens on PBS, but a major congrats on a powerful documentary, CURED. First of all, how are you feeling about your latest baby?
Yes, it has been an odyssey. We've been working on this for about 5 years, so I am feeling gratified that we managed to get it done, and doubly gratified by the reactions we're getting, both from critics and journalists, but also from folks who are actually seeing it and responding to it and reaching out. So that has been a wonderful process. And, I think I'm sure we'll talk more, but this is such a pivotal moment in the modern movement for LGBTQ equality and dignity, but also such a little known one with some amazing details, like a crazy Halloween mask at the center of the story and a cassette tape and some heroic activists whose courage is such a source of inspiration. So lots of positive aspects of this. And it is a documentary with a happy ending, which, I think is also something that can inspire us all in these difficult, challenging times.
First of all, talk to me in general terms about what this documentary is and what it's about, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association, which was the world's authority on mental health, classified every single gay person automatically as having a mental disorder. In the first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which was published in 1952, homosexuality was listed under sociopathic personality disturbance and characterized by a failure to conform to accepted social norms. So if you were gay, therefore you were branded as being a sociopath. And activists came to realize that label, that stigma, was quite a roadblock both to progress socially and politically and culturally, and also to our concept of ourselves. And so the film documents this quite unlikely movement, uprising, that pushed back this David Goliath battle against the APA, such a formidable opponent, and ultimately won, resulting in the decision to remove homosexuality from the DSM in 1973.
So, Patrick Salmon and yourself, the two of you co-produced this documentary and co-directed CURED. Was there a moment, was there a flashpoint, a spark that made you guys say, hey, let's tell this story now? Was there that moment?
There was, and I will give credit as it is due to Patrick, my co-director. It was his idea, and the flashpoint for him was seeing a quite surreal and arresting photograph of Dr. John Fryer addressing the APA at its 1972 annual convention. He was a psychiatrist and a gay man, and he knew that if he were to tell his story and open up about being a gay man who was also working as a psychiatrist, he would most likely get fired from his position at Temple University and also have his medical license revoked, because the notion of a gay person being fit to practice psychiatry was completely unthinkable at that time. So he did agree to participate in this panel, but only on the condition that he could do so in disguise. And he came up with quite an unforgettable disguise with a distorted Richard Nixon mask, a fright wig, a oversized tuxedo. If people have seen Leatherface, there's a real connection between this image of Dr. Fryer, who called himself Dr. Anonymous, and the character of Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which did come out like 2 years later. So personally, I feel like there was some direct connection there. But that is such an arresting image. I mean, you think about conferences and conventions and the typical panel discussion, and this was like totally surreal, but also such a turning point in this battle, because for the first time, psychiatrists were confronted with a member of their own profession opening up and talking about his own role and sort of tortured experiences as a gay psychiatrist and the oppression he felt. And it really was a turning point, such a moment where his openness and honesty, which of course is ironic that for him to come out and open up, he could only do so behind a mask. Yeah. But so Patrick, as a coming out story, it's pretty crazy. But
Patrick saw this image.
Point. Patrick saw this image and felt like somebody needs to do a film about this. Mm-hmm. And then we teamed up. I had consulted on his earlier film about Alan Turing called Codebreaker, mm-hmm. and we had been friends for quite a while. And I've been working on social issue documentaries, mostly for PBS, for 20 something years. On civil rights and human rights and LGBT rights. And so we did team up, and it turned out to be such a positive collaboration. I think, we do have different backgrounds and different skill sets, but fundamentally are both so passionate about telling untold stories from history and really thinking about gay liberation and what it means to be a healthy, happy, well-adjusted gay person, and this bigger question about social change and social justice, which I think the story in CURED provides a blueprint for other movements and other campaigns, because it was quite an unlikely scenario, and yet the activists prevailed.
So I've seen the documentary. It's so well done. I couldn't recommend it any higher. But for me, this film, this documentary is about, it's telling the story of people. Some are still alive, some are not, but I am standing on their shoulders because they paved the path, because in 73, I believe, they got homosexuality taken out of the diagnostic and statistical manual. And so I am no longer considered crazy. And for me, that's what this documentary is about, essentially. For you, personally, what is this documentary about?
Well, it's great to hear your takeaway, Mark, because that's the heart of the story.
I'm not bananas.
Quite the contrary. And to have that label, kind of hanging over anyone, no matter how happy and well-adjusted and high-functioning, I think is an incredible burden and obstacle to overcome. And I agree entirely that this film celebrates the heroic work of trailblazers, these crusaders who were out there as early as the mid-60s, before there was really a full-fledged movement for LGBTQ equality, out there picketing and protesting and raising their voices and arguing that, this is not a pathology, and, let's look at the science, and let's look at the data, and let's talk to each other, and let's engage in dialogue. So I totally agree that it's about a really heroic group of activists. And I'll also say that, one of our goals in doing the film, when we started back in 2015, was precisely to chronicle the first person testimony of these activists. And of the 15 or so interviews that we conducted, 5 of our storytellers have died since we spoke to them. And so I just think that really underscores the fragility of the story and the urgency of chronicling it as we did. The film is built on those interviews and that testimony from people who lived through it. Most recently, Kay Lahusen, one of the primary storytellers, died at the age of 91 earlier this year, and 4 others, as I said, of our storytellers have died. And it's just such a poignant piece of the story. But I think the positive news there is that we do have these very in-depth interviews with them, which are excerpted in the film.
And we get to hear their story.
And we get to hear their stories in their, from their point of view.
Yeah. You've been working on this film since 2015. Talk to me about the researching process. How long did that take, doing the research and all that entailed?
It was kind of an odyssey. I think anybody who's seen films about LGBTQ history would agree there's sort of a canon of material that gets used and incorporated quite frequently, understandably, because there's a limited body of footage and visuals that exist.
Especially around Stonewall.
Sure. Very limited. But we were determined with the story to dig and see what we could find to sort of expand that canon. And I am happy to say that we found some amazing discoveries.
Yes, you did.
For one thing, there was this unforgettable panel on the PBS talk show, The David Susskind Show, hosted by this pretty liberal guy, David Susskind. It was a weekly airing of public affairs issues. And to his credit, he invited 7 out lesbians to talk to him in 1971. But I don't think Mr. Susskind was ready for the fierceness and the unapologetic attitude that these women projected. They were so adamant about telling him that they did not feel sick, they did not feel that they needed to be cured, and he sort of offered or suggested that with the right man, perhaps himself, in the picture, these women could see the light and could come over to the healthy side, so to speak, of sexual expression. And I just don't think he knew what was in store. So we found that footage, and I don't think people had seen it for 50 years. That was one example of a gem that not been seen.
Talk to me about, you were mentioning earlier about John Fryer and that image that sparked everything. the image, the photo of him in that mask. But talk to me about finding the cassette tape of his speech that he gave on that panel, because my understanding is you guys were planning to have an actor maybe recite the speech because you had the transcript of it, but you actually found the cassette tape of his actual speech, his words, his voice. Yes. How did you find that cassette tape?
Right. Well, after Dr. Fryer died about 20 years ago, a friend of his packed up his collection of materials from his sprawling home in Philadelphia and ended up donating 217 boxes of material to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, where they are now housed. And Patrick and I spent about a week there going through boxes and finding some fantastic elements, photographs, diary entries, patient records, all sorts of, ephemera and materials that helped us understand who John Fryer was. But then there was this very intriguing box, little shoebox actually, that was labeled miscellaneous audio. And we found a cassette recorder, and I was kind of terrified that it would eat these fragile cassettes that were mostly unlabeled and not even really in cases. So I sat there for hour after hour listening to cassettes from Dr. Fryer's collection, which included some bird songs, some foreign language tapes, some organ music, because he was quite a passionate aficionado of organ music and an organist himself. And then, miraculously enough, there was this audio tape of the panel discussion from 1972 where Dr. Fryer gave his speech as Dr. Anonymous. And I'm usually pretty well behaved in libraries and archives, but I think I let out a yelp at that moment because it was such a fantastic and invaluable discovery for the sake of the film. As you said, we were thinking about what actor we could get to voice and recreate the speech, because we did have the written text, but I don't think any actor could have done justice to the authentic emotion that John Fryer was feeling on that day. And he was, after all, the very first psychiatrist who had ever stood up before his colleagues and openly identified himself as a gay person. And he was taking a really big risk, as we mentioned before. Even in the disguise, it's kind of remarkable to me that he wasn't outed and wasn't identified, but apparently he revealed his identity as Dr. Anonymous about 20 years later at the 1994 APA convention. He gave another talk and talked about his appearance in 1972 as Dr. Anonymous. And then the other footnote to this story is that the friend of Dr. Fryer who packed up the estate told us that he, in fact, found the mask that Dr. Fryer had worn and figured it was a relic from an old Halloween costume and tossed it in the trash.
Oh, no. So,
you're like, couldn't you have packed up 218 boxes? It was such a moment, a piece of history that is sobering
and the quality,
poignant,
of the recording. It's so well done.
I agree. Absolutely. Yes. And so invaluable to document that moment in such an immediate and authentic way, and so impassioned. He ends up by saying that for closeted gay psychiatrists who are living this double life, that the greatest loss, as he puts it, is our humanity. And I just think that's, such a powerful, profound line about what was at stake.
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update. But first up, a clip from Boys Beware, a 1961 social guidance propaganda film.
That looks innocent enough, doesn't it? Lots of young people hitchhike. Seems like a good way to get from one place to another. But sometimes there are dangers involved that never meet the eye. So no matter where you meet a stranger, be careful if they are too friendly. One never knows when the homosexual is about. Let's take the case of Jimmy Barnes. Jimmy played baseball all afternoon, and he didn't feel like walking home, so he decided to thumb a ride. He'd done it 100 times before, and he didn't think anything was unusual when the driver struck up a friendly conversation. In fact, he seemed like a real nice guy. What Jimmy didn't know was that Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual, a person who demands an intimate relationship with members of their own sex. So no matter where you meet a stranger, be careful if they are too friendly, if they try to win your confidence too quickly, and if they become overly personal. One never knows when the homosexual is about. He may appear normal.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, Peter B., who listens to Rainbow Country on CKCU-FM in Ottawa, commented on episode 273, Triumph, Rock and Roll Machine. He writes, quote, "Thank y'all! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. This is yet another example of great community. Community radio is important." Unquote. As you know, this show airs on community and campus radio, independent radio, and on streaming. All these platforms are listener-driven, as well as listener-supported. Where else but on Rainbow Country, on this very platform, will you hear conversations on trans issues, out professional athletes, pillars of Canada's LGBT community like Reverend Dr. Brent Hawkes, not to mention spotlighting LGBT and independent artists. So if you are able to, please consider making a donation to this very platform you are listening to. And if you're listening on the edited podcast version, consider making a donation to your local independent community and campus station. Let your voice, let your support be heard.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mark Tewksbury, Olympic champion, leader, humanitarian. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So the gay liberation movement wanted homosexuality removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There's actual footage of a conference where some LGBT activists essentially take it over for a period of time. They get on stage, they start talking to these psychiatrists, But what ends up happening, and there's footage of this, is that they break into roundtable panels, smaller panels, and they start talking to these doctors, letting them know that they're not crazy. When you found that footage, what went through your mind?
That was another
squeal,
joy, another yelp. Yeah, at least metaphorically, because as you just said, like that transition within the sequence or the progression of the activism was such a turning point. You know, for the early stage of this movement, there were quite a number of confrontations, and the strategy was really invade conventions and shut them down and make a lot of noise and sort of put out a wake-up call, like, we're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere, and we resent the fact that you are labeling us in this way without even talking to us in many cases. And what's so remarkable about that footage you mentioned is that the activists did invade that meeting, but then they said, you know, we want to talk to you. We want to share our perspective, and instead of having you assess us through this abstract and bogus, you know, method of assuming and filtering your perceptions through bias and prejudice, could we please have a dialogue? And I think for the very first time, so many of those therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists talked to gay people who were saying, we're not sick, we're not pathological, we feel quite well adjusted, we don't feel like we need to be cured. And it was such a turning point. So the fact that there's footage of that moment is astonishingly helpful for the storytelling. And I just think that was, as a tactic, it was such a smart and pivotal move. And I also give the mental health professionals credit for actually listening. I mean, that is their job, right? It's like the heart of their profession, to listen to people and respond and try to heal and try to be empathetic and empathic. And in this case, they did. And I should say that session that the activists invaded was all about aversion therapy and how it can help cure gay people. And aversion therapy, as we show in the film, often meant, you know, gay men would look at pictures of men and of women, and when the pictures of the men came up, they would get these jolts of electricity, sometimes to their genitals, or they would be induced to vomit. I mean, it was brutal. And some of these activists at that meeting, at that session, had gone through that. So it really, the stakes, again, were quite high and quite, you know, life or death. And it just was such a turning point.
Even lobotomies. There's a young man in the documentary that I believe went through a lobotomy, and he's talking. And
yes, that was part of, you know, we wanted to find the right balance between the activism and the treatments, and we didn't want to traumatize people, and we didn't want to induce unnecessary sort of cringing or, you know, reactions of horror, but we wanted to show that the stakes were quite serious. And as you said, there's footage of a gay man who underwent a lobotomy. There's footage of a man from Oklahoma and a woman from Connecticut who both went through electroconvulsive therapy. And then one of our central storytellers tells this other, you know, anecdote about her mother discovering that she was a lesbian and giving her daughter a choice, which was go to the mental institution in upstate New York or marry a man, which she did at the age of 14, which to me is every bit as brutal as some of the other kinds of cures. So they forged her documents and, you know, they made it seem like she was of legal age to be married, and she actually went through with this wedding at the age of 14.
So you've been making social issue documentaries for, I believe, over 25 years. You've won a number of awards, like 20 international awards, including an Emmy, a Peabody, a GLAAD award. For yourself, what makes a good, compelling documentary?
Well, yes, that's a very essential question. I think at the heart of this film, and I think the other projects I've had the honor of working on, there is this, when you have characters or storytellers who have gone through life-changing experiences and are able to articulate what they've gone through and explain how they've been transformed or what they've lived through and experienced, I think that is crucial, the sense of compelling storytellers. And I think, so many of the projects I've worked on, as I said, have been about civil rights and human rights and LGBT protests. And I think the other element is the sense of bringing about change and finding ways to come together, often in small movements or large movements or coalitions. There's different configurations and permutations, but there is that theme that change is possible. Systemic, lasting social change can happen, which I think is at the heart of CURED too. And I think that's part of what makes it so uplifting. Like when these activists started out fighting the APA, as we understand it, like 95% of psychiatrists at that time believed that homosexuality was in fact a mental illness. And, that's a pretty formidable starting point to challenge. And yet, as you were saying before, they took on the fight, this David versus Goliath battle, and managed to partly, I think key to the strategy too, was managed to find some very key allies who in some cases put their careers and their reputations on the line and spoke up and stood out. And a lot of it too is about the power of data and science and facts, which the psychiatrists considered. Both sides in this debate actually claim to have science on their side, but I think the LGBTQ activists were so effective in cutting through the sort of bogus pseudoscience that was being put forward by proponents of the illness label. Sometimes the samples, for instance, were so flawed. A psychiatrist might say, I was able to cure 70% of my patients or 70% of the homosexuals that I studied. But if the only sample you're looking at is gay people who come to a psychiatrist in order to be cured, like that is bogus. That is not a scientifically valid study. Whereas one of the key research studies that the activists did point to was the work of Evelyn Hooker, who was a psychologist, and she studied the mental health of a group of gay men and a group of straight men, and then had those tests assessed by world-renowned experts who were able to look at those test results, and they could not distinguish between the gay and straight men. And the conclusion was, when you're talking about pathology or mental health, there's no verifiable difference. So at its heart, there was this battle about science. And I think, that's another sort of universal aspect of this film that I think can translate into a broader sense of connections that people can take away from the story, and how, there's, of course, it's a story about history, but in some ways, it's also a story with incredible relevance to the present. And quite literally, there is still, the effort to cure gay people through conversion therapy, which is, this practice that aims to change sexual orientation or gender identity. And in the US, a number of states have banned that practice as conducted by licensed medical providers for minors, but the majority of states here in the US still allow it to happen. And it has been discredited by every major medical institution, which is a big change from 50 years ago.
Don't you guys have a campaign around that?
We do, yeah. We've raised some funding, outreach dollars from the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, along with AARP and some other funders who are giving us an opportunity to take the film into communities, into medical schools, into, in some cases, legislative bodies or communities where there's legislation pending, to get people who are actually going to be voting on this question to think about the historical context and to think about where we are now with conversion therapy and why it is such a harmful, destructive practice that every major medical organization does agree should be banned. And, there's a national ban in the works in the UK and in New Zealand and Taiwan and a number of countries, but, we haven't managed to do that yet in the US. And so it is, I think, a very relevant and direct connection to the story we tell in CURED.
I'm interested to know, do you know of Garrett Conley?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's been on the show talking about Boy Erased.
Sure.
And his experience in Love in Action in that facility, I guess, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
Have you reached out to him to be part of your campaign?
We have some mutual friends, and it's such a good point that as we're doing more panels and more discussions and more outreach, he would be a perfect ally or participant in our work. So I think that needs to happen because I love, his story is so compelling, and we do. It's we're really going down the same road, but we haven't yet directly connected. I think that needs to happen, and I'll keep you posted. But it's a great idea.
The Future Perfect Project. What is this?
They are a group that works to empower LGBTQ young people through artistic projects and seminars and workshops. And it's a wonderful, we've been collaborating with them and have started a series of intergenerational conversations, which we've shot 2 so far, and we're hoping that that takes off and that it becomes a broader project. But we have 2 really powerful conversations in the works between elders in their 70s and 80s talking with teenagers, and there's so much common ground when you're thinking about what it means to be queer and family issues and coming out and self-acceptance
and knowing the history.
And knowing the history, right. And I think for both people in that conversation, it's a really moving and enlightening opportunity. So we're excited about that. And the first one is almost done and will soon be released. CUREDdocumentary.com, which is our website, will have all the updates on that. But yes, we are thrilled to be partnering with the Future Perfect Project, and they've brought in some of their young people who are young activists and such amazing, dynamic speakers and crusaders. So it's been really a positive collaboration.
Did you always want to be a filmmaker?
Well, I in college I did a lot of print journalism, and I guess they're interconnected, but I wasn't sure if I would end up as a writer or editor. And I have done several book projects and had worked at Time Magazine for a while, so I sort of have this role as in the writing and editing world. But then I had the real honor of working on Eyes on the Prize, which is the first documentary project I ever worked on, which is 14 hours on the history of the U.S. civil rights movement. And I think having worked on that, I kind of got hooked on telling stories through documentary, social issue documentaries, partly because, you can do things in a film that you can't really do in a book, or at least there's just a visceral level and an emotional level that comes through filmmaking that I think is often deeper than other forms of communication. And the reach of a film, we know that millions of people will be viewing CURED worldwide through the distribution channels. And that's just, if you're trying to tell a story, I think part of the question is, how do you reach people? And we are in an age when broadcast and streaming has the potential to really get the story seen by literally millions of people. And I'll say also, it's exciting that the documentary has been optioned as the basis for a limited scripted series for FX or Hulu, which is being developed by Stephen Canals, who co-created Pose. And so he's, dreaming up or working on developing a 6 or 8 part scripted series that would flesh out the moments in the documentary through scripted scenes. And I think it could be such a great project that's, still in the early stages, and it's unclear exactly when or even if it's going to materialize. But the idea to me is amazing. So I'm, I guess, in the process of expanding from nonfiction into fictional projects. Yes. Historical fiction.
So when audiences see Cured, what would you like your audiences to come away with after seeing this powerful documentary?
Well, I think, we've touched on it, but this sense that even in the face of obstacles that seem impossible or so formidable, there is the potential to bring about change. And I think the film can be a blueprint for people to take inspiration from, and to think about that process of, how did these activists do it? And, certainly central to that was this role that was played both by insiders working inside the APA, like John Fryer and other psychiatrists who spoke up, and also by street activists and outsiders who played a giant role in this battle. So that element, inside and outside, pushing in it, not necessarily in a coordinated way, but really in a way that resulted in a giant transformation. It's fascinating to think, or to realize that at today, as we speak, the CEO of the APA is an openly gay psychiatrist. And so, as one example of the sort of impact and legacy of this change, that's pretty striking. And legal experts that we've talked to have said that every major decision in terms of Supreme Court rulings and legislative rulings or policies relating to progress for LGBTQ people has some roots in this 1973 change, which I don't think is overstated. I know could sound quite hyperbolic or quite like a dramatic statement to say this was the greatest gay victory, as the reporter puts it in the film, but it did open the doors to change and to progress and to this transformation, this revolution in how LGBTQ people function in society and how we think about ourselves. So I think that's the bottom line for this film. There was this seemingly impossible obstacle, and yet it was overcome.
And just think, from the 1950s to 2021, going into 2022, and the CEO and medical director of the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Saul Levine, is an openly gay man. Who would have thought?
Exactly. Right. That was not, you couldn't have predicted that in 1950 or 60 or 70 or even 80. It's mm-hmm. quite a evolution. Absolutely.
Evolution. So what's coming up next for this film? It's currently on PBS as well as on the PBS app. But over and above that, what's coming up next for Cured?
Well, we are in the process of reaching out to broadcasters around the world, including Canada. So stay tuned. That is emerging soon in terms of the details, but I'm confident that there will indeed be a broadcast in Canada in 2022, as well as distribution through iTunes and other digital platforms. And then, as I mentioned, our outreach campaign is going strong. We've done over 100 at this point virtual screenings. college campuses and medical schools and LGBT organizations and social justice groups. So that has been an amazing way to connect with people, and we're still pursuing that. So if folks have an interest in hosting that kind of event for their organization, again, contact us through the website at cureddocumentary.com, and we'd love to discuss that and try to find a way to share the film with various organizations. I will say, like, literally dozens of film festivals throughout Canada have shown the film in recent months, and just about a week ago, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, as part of its annual meeting, had a screening and a great discussion. So the love from Canada has been very strong. And
yay!
I know, it's like I have some relatives in Winnipeg, actually. Whenever I go there, I feel like, and whenever I go to Toronto, it's just such a, from my point of view, such a enlightened place.
Well, say hello to your Winnipeg relatives, because this show airs in Winnipeg.
I understand. Yes, I have such a fondness and such a respect for the, maybe I'm overly romanticizing the wonders of Canada, but I do think there's a certain humanity and decency that may not have translated to the other side of the border. Like, we Americans could learn so much, is what I'm trying to say, from the sort of spirit that I've encountered among Canadians.
Have you guys thought about having this film somehow be part of the educational curriculum, like for history or something?
Absolutely. That is underway as well. We have some funding in place. We're creating a curriculum guide and a version of the film specifically for high school history and social studies classes. And here in the US, a number of states have actually mandated that as part of the public school curriculum, LGBTQ topics and figures from history need to be taught, which is quite a revolution. So we are focusing in part on those states, but also on, making the film available to any teacher who wants it. And I've done that with previous films, and it has been incredibly heartening and rewarding to see the way that teachers can use a film like this and to go into classrooms, which I've done quite a bit of with previous projects, and chat with students and listen to their takeaways. And it's so, empowering for me as a filmmaker, but I hope for young people who see this film and connect to the history. And as you said at the beginning, to the crusaders, the activists on whose shoulders we stand. So absolutely a curriculum and a school version of CURED is in the works.
Yay! Well done.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, I should have mentioned it before, but it's really at the
I just thought of it.
Planning. No, it's a great piece of the project, and there's so much, I think, from a history teacher's point of view, so much to dig into in terms of Freud and Kinsey and sort of the Cold War and conformity, and like, why did this diagnosis come from, and the process of activism. And there's really quite a lot of powerful angles to focus on within the context of a history or social studies class, or an English class, or a psychology class. There's a lot of potential for high school and college, and a lot, it's also available for college adoption. And I should say, just last week, the American Historical Association announced its list of awards, and they picked one film to focus on as the best documentary of 2021, and it was CURED. So that was quite a shot in the arm.
Amazing.
Such an amazing surprise and honor. And we'll be showing the film at their upcoming convention and connecting with history professors, college history professors. So I am also excited and humbled by that.
Bennett Singer, thank you so much for your time. Well said, well done, and well made.
My pleasure. It was such a pleasure to connect with you and to dig into some of this history. So thank you so much from our entire team.
If you were gay in those days, you were diagnosed as suffering from a mental disorder. Like so many people in my generation, I went to psychoanalysis to be cured.
These These are some of the methods doctors employ to cure homosexuality: electroshock therapy, hysterectomies on lesbians, castrations of gay men.
People use psychiatry as a reason to discriminate. Apart from the discrimination against us, it gave us a horrible image of ourselves.
In the early 1970s, there was this growing rebellion against psychiatry, and we wanted to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
The body of knowledge which claims sickness for homosexuality has to be challenged.
We could not expect our civil rights as long as we were burdened with the sickness label.
Maybe it makes you feel good to be able to say that we're sick. Does it make you feel good?
The body of medical evidence suggests that it is a mental aberration.
There were so many of us that were at the same point. Enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Period.
A number of psychiatrists talked about, why don't we organize, we can make an impact. John Fryer took a step as being the first psychiatrist to say, I'm a gay person, but no one recognized him. He represented all the people who were hiding and invisible.
The effect was electric.
At psychiatric annual meetings, there were demonstrations, if not in fact riots. Ron Gold's a gay activist. He got up there and he yelled out, "Stop it, you're making me sick."
I told them in my speech, you don't have the right to decide that perfectly happy people are sick.
This fight was the most important moment in gay liberation history.
For more on Bennett Singer and this powerful new film, CUREDdocumentary.com.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen, Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, just head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, follow me on socials at Mark Tara Music. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, stay well, stay strong, and stay safe.